I'm Emily Weejet, and for SmokingBandits.com, I'm chatting with Stephen Helfer, co-founder of the United States organization Cambridge Citizens for Smokers' Rights. Stephen has been fighting tobacco control and the rise of anti-smoking legislation since the 1990s. Welcome, Stephen.
Welcome. Thank you for having me.
How long have you been a smokers' rights advocate?
Well, I think I would say probably about 1990. Yeah, I would say even before that. I mean, I had serious questions about the whole anti-smoking movement prior to 1990. The first action I took, so to speak, was when there was a proposal to ban smoking in the town of Brookline. And I went there with a poster and attended the town meeting. They were going to ban it in bars, which in 1994 was pretty radical.
That was amazingly early for something like that.
Brookline was probably the first town in the state of Massachusetts to do that. But I think, I'm trying to think, yeah, it's hard to go back that far, but I remember that when I attended the town hearing, and I had a poster where I questioned, I was talking about the situation in Japan. I had on a poster that they had the highest average life expectancy, the lowest rate of heart disease, and one of the world's lowest rates of lung cancer, and yet the highest rate of smoking. So I was trying to bring it to the attention of the public then.
You were protesting in 1994. What kind of reactions did you get from members of the public?
I couldn't get a lot of attention, but I did get some attention, and it wasn't negative. It wasn't, you know, I don't think in 1994, if my year is correct, and I'm pretty sure it is correct, I could check my records, but I don't think there was this kind of animosity towards smokers that there is now.
In 1994, did you find that members of the public treated you much differently when you were protesting smoking bans? It seems to me at that time that was not, it was such a novel thing to protest a smoking ban. Smoking bans were unheard of in bars at that time.
Yeah, at that particular hearing, which was what was called a town meeting in the town of Brookline, there was a lot of argument back and forth. And a lot of the argument, there were, smokers weren't really represented, but a lot of people in the town thought that that was going way too far. So it was an interesting event. It was very different than what we have today. Of course, now this is 24 years later.
So how did you see it coming before then? If you were involved in the early 90s, was it just through proposals like this in Brookline that disturbed you? Or did you see it coming earlier than that?
Well, I mean, I think other people saw it coming. I mean, I think they saw that it was going to be a gradual, step-by-step implementation. And that's why when people with whom we have been in discussion say that when Britain banned smoking in their bars, that this was something that was a surprise to them, it could not possibly, I don't believe it could have been a surprise, because even before Britain did it, I was aware of it. I was reading in the papers, and there was discussion about it months and months prior to its passage in whatever legislative body passed it. And I was very frustrated in those days by the lack of, it didn't seem like smokers they seemed to be allowing themselves to be isolated and ostracized from society. And I really kept thinking, I know this is you may not, it just seemed like, like the Jews in Germany. I mean, it wasn't like the Nazis or Hitler, all of a sudden sprang something on, on an unsuspecting public. This was something that had been building slowly and surely. I don't want to draw comparisons because it's not the same in terms of, I don't think there are even now calls for putting smokers in concentration camps. But, I think in Germany prior to the Second World War, there weren't any secrets. Like, it wasn't like the Nazis were keeping secrets yet. In my impression, and I'm not a real historian of the time, I don't think Jews did anything, by and large.
You saw the signs that this was coming, this step-by-step implementation of laws that were going to restrict smokers' freedom. How did you prepare for that? Is that one reason that you founded Cambridge Citizens for Smokers' Rights?
Yes, I did a lot of talking to other people, a lot of smokers, but then again, most smokers kind of accepted the putative science about smoking, and and Cambridge Citizens for Smokers' Rights was founded when they were going to pass a smoking ban in bars in Cambridge, and several restaurateurs here in Cambridge, about 6 of them, really organized opposition to it, very powerful opposition. I went down to New York and testified in front of the city council in New York several times, because that ban in New York, that was very, very highly contested. There were many, many restaurateurs who were very, very opposed to that, and bar owners. So in the city council meetings in New York, there was tremendous opposition. But the opposition came from restaurant and bar owners, and to a large extent, other than Audrey Silk and several persons whom she was able to conscript, it came from restaurant owners. And that's a weak opposition, because their opposition was not that it was going to infringe freedom, not that it was based on that the whole idea of these smokings were based on false science, but based on it was going to be bad for business. And that's not a strong argument, because as Michael McFadden would like to say, you say it's bad for your business, we say it's killing babies.
Yep.
Those two arguments don't counter argue well.
That's a really interesting point, because it's something that I don't hear talked about a lot nowadays, but it's a theme that I see recurring throughout the news accounts that I read of the implementation of bar bans in New York and in Boston and in Cambridge. What opposition there was really only came from business owners, which I think, in part has to do with the fact that business owners have always been very respected members of communities, and people are very willing to hear what they have to say at council meetings. But in this case, it really seems like it was a failed attempt to defeat these bans.
Well, in Cambridge, it was very powerful, our movement, our side, and we delayed it for months and months. And Boston passed it before we did, and that was really, no one expected that, because people expected that Cambridge, being such a progressive city, that it would pass it before Boston. So we had smoking in bars for at least 6 months after Boston, and that sounds like a short period of time, and I guess it is a short period of time, but it was very, very nice.
So do you feel that your efforts to organize Cambridge Citizens for Smokers' Rights had something to do with the increased opposition in Cambridge as opposed to Boston?
Yeah, but it was also we had very active restaurant owners. Boston didn't have a good opposition. We had a good opposition, actually led by, like any popular movement, it's only a very, very few people. But, it only needs a very, very few people. We had a very few people, but they were very, very active. And I think Cambridge Citizens for Smokers' Rights was very helpful, but I don't think that was the reason that we delayed it. It was because of the bar owners. And I would say the bar owners, basically we're talking about 3 or 4 bar owners.
And this is a difficult question, which I'm not sure you can answer, but I'd like to hear your speculations. Do you think that the economic effects have played out the way that bar owners predicted at the time, saying it was going to be bad for business? Do you think that has been the case?
No.
No.
No, I don't think there's any good evidence that that's the case. I mean, I think I wasn't even sure that that wasn't my argument. First of all, I didn't make that argument, and second of all, I didn't think the bar owners had any good evidence that that would be the case. And I think the evidence here in Cambridge and in Boston and in New York is that is unfortunately not the case.
I do think we've seen a change possibly in, it's all very speculative, but I think we've possibly seen a change in the type of bars that are popular. And I think bars tend to serve more food nowadays as opposed to being purely drinking establishments, which I personally think has something to do with smoking bans. But it's very difficult to say. I think people have just accustomed themselves to a new style of going out in the evenings.
I agree with you. I think that's true, and I think you will find bar owners will probably come to that conclusion also, that they did have to change more or less to become kind of more of a food establishment than a drinking establishment.
More family-friendly, more family-oriented in general.
And I think a lot of people, even non-smokers, will agree. Some, well, I mean, for example, when I worked in this cafe called Cafe Pamplona, this young woman came up to me after the ban. She wasn't aware that the owner, well, she said to me, why did the owner go along with the ban? Because although she was a non-smoker, she didn't care about secondhand smoke, but she did notice that after the ban, the cafe had become much less sociable. People talked to one another less. There was less laughing. There was less animation. So I think this is definitely the case. And other people, even non-smokers, have noticed this. I've talked to several non-smokers, and I've talked to several bar owners who have said that, yes, it's a different type of business. It's a different type of atmosphere. But, you know, the idea that a lot of bar owners would go out of business just did not happen. Unfortunately, I wish it did. Not because I don't like bar owners, but if there had been devastating economic consequences, it would have been very helpful to our side, but there weren't.
In 2013, you participated in a protest at the City Hall in New York City with Audrey Silk. Audrey Silk and yourself both lit up cigarettes inside City Hall. What was the occasion for that protest?
I think it was a small room, and Mayor, I think it was Mayor Bloomberg was on his way out, and it was some kind of, I don't even remember, but Audrey had asked me to attend, and I was very scared to do it, but Audrey wasn't scared at all, as a matter of fact, and she and I did it, and it was kind of fun. It was fun. I thought we would be throttled to death, but we weren't, and I didn't even spend a night in jail.
Was it a strange experience to light a cigarette in City Hall in an atmosphere that you knew it was expressly forbidden? Was it difficult to do that?
Well, it was, yes, it was difficult, very difficult for me, but it wasn't difficult for Audrey, so I followed her lead. You know, it's amazing. It's because, you know, as they say, you know, an army of lambs led by a lion can defeat an army of lions led by a lamb.
Speaking of the lambs, did you hope to inspire other smokers to acts of civil disobedience by that action?
I did not have any kind of expectations in that regard. This was something that was just, there was Audrey and I, and you know, I was not under that impression. It would have been nice, I mean, it's very obvious that, I mean, on Frank's blog, someone said, why don't 50 smokers go into a bar and light up? And of course they could easily, and it would be something that would be very difficult to stop. But the question is, can you get 50 smokers to do that? And that's where I would hope, or was hoping, let's say, that Frank might be able to do things of that nature, not necessarily civil disobedience. But I do think civil disobedience is important. And I was in New York recently, and I saw a lot of people smoking in public parks.
It's interesting. Whenever I'm in New York City, I feel like I actually see more people smoking on the street than I do in Boston or Cambridge. It's interesting to notice that, because in some ways I feel that New York is even more unfriendly to smokers in some ways, but it seems that more people smoke there. What recent activities have you been involved with Cambridge Citizens for Smokers' Rights?
Well, of course, we were very happy to get our city council to significantly soften the park smoking ban. And I think, when I walk around Cambridge and I can smoke in parks, I think that is, and not worry about being ticketed. I mean, that is a real nice feeling of freedom. And I feel it's good also for the other smokers. I feel good about that. And, of course, we've been trying to get this thing where, these smoking receptacles to help get rid of smoking litter here in Cambridge would be very good.
Cigarette butt receptacles.
Yes, the sidewalk butlers, which is kind of stalled. I don't think they're being properly set up. And Mark McGovern, who is now mayor, has not, he said he would work with me on this, and he's not really responded to me. But then I feel very, very, let's say, grateful to McGovern, because I think he was the one who decided that Cambridge would not go along with a smoking ban in parks as they did in New York and they did in Boston. So even though he hasn't been very cooperative with me recently, and I'm just, right now, I'm into something that I've got this idea that I'm trying to do, and I'm trying to get, I'm very tired of people discussing, the anti-smoking movement and decrying the anti-smoking movement and talking about how absurd the anti-smoking movement is. I would like to get a group of people, and I'm trying to do this right now, who will kind of pledge to email legislators, and not only email, but respond back to me and say they've done it, because I'm tired of, saying email a particular legislator or something, and then I don't know if people do it, and a lot of people don't do it. I mean, it really is, you and I know this, it's very hard to get people to act. People are very happy to talk, but to act is very difficult. It's very difficult to get myself to act, frankly. But this, I mean, I think if there is going to be any success for smokers' rights, it's going to be on very conventional political, using political methods, contacting city councilors, showing up at public hearings, writing letters to the editor, all of these things. But people tend not to do them.
So you've witnessed in the last 30 years or more a gradual incremental tightening of the noose for smokers. How bad do you think it's going to get for smokers?
How bad do I think? That's an interesting question. Well, I think, frankly, that, the one thing on the other side of the equation in terms of what's good is the fact that there are still so many people smoking. And, you know, many of these people are not, you know, let's say are very, very normal types of people. I wouldn't say the majority are, but I would say many of them are. And there are many young people smoking. And I think, you know, that's a sign that, you know, the social engineering aspects of the anti-smoking movement are not working as well as they thought they would. I mean, in 1990, I think it was C. Everett Koop, who you probably don't even know the name C. Everett Koop. Well, he was the first, well, he was a very, very active Surgeon General. And he and a lot of other groups put together a document called Blueprint for Success, where they predicted by the year 2000, America would be, no one would smoke in America. So they're way, way behind schedule. And I think the tobacco companies, you know, I think they were initially combative. And for many years, they tried to encourage smokers to join in and defend themselves. And they were decidedly unsuccessful at that. But the tobacco companies have kind of taken a very low profile. And I think they're playing it pretty smart. You know, they don't ever criticize the anti-smokers. They just, you know, and they're still in business, which is amazing. How bad do I think it could get? I do think this FDA idea to start fiddling with nicotine in cigarettes is we're getting pretty. That's pretty profound. But then again, I think, and you and I disagree on this regard, is I think as much as I find vaping unattractive, I think it is a kind of a form of resistance and something that the anti-smokers didn't foresee and are not quite sure how to deal with. And again, the anti-smokers are really showing their true colors because some of their statements about vaping are just so absurd that I think they might be exposing themselves. Yes.
Why do you smoke, and why smokers' rights?
Right. Why do I smoke? I think smoking has provided me, for most of my life, a very reliable pleasure, even at times when I've been very depressed or agitated. I think it's always been very comforting. And as I've said, over the course of my life, you know, I have seen so many people who quit smoking, not only whose health didn't improve, but it got worse. I've seen other people who never smoked and sadly died young. And I've seen many people and known several who have smoked happily into their 80s and 90s. So I question very seriously most of the scientific, so-called scientific evidence that's used to convince us that smoking is lethal. And then smokers' rights is that I see a lot of people, particularly poor people and particularly people with mental illness, whose lives are really, really being hurt. And it's incredible to me, for example, like you can go by a hospital and you see people outside in wheelchairs in the snow smoking.
I think that example you just gave of, you know, people smoking outside a hospital or, you know, an elderly person's home, you know, that when people look at them, they don't feel what a shame it is that these people are being forced to stand outside and smoke. What they feel is that it's contempt because they feel that these people should just quit smoking and stop smoking.
Right.
Thanks for joining us, Stephen.
Well, thank you for interviewing me. I hope I've been reasonably cogent. Good night.